Springfield, Michigan, 1942. As World War II rages across several continents, acclaimed architect and eventual designer of the St. Louis Arch, Eero Saarinen, is secretly enlisted by the United States military to work for a new clandestine organization. Its name? The OSS, Office of Strategic Services, or as it is known today, the CIA.
The fact that Eero Saarinen was in the OSS designing weapon systems during World War II, and at a time when the OSS was looking into ways to weaponize weather, makes his whole connection to the design of the St. Louis Arch extremely interesting. Now, that isn't to say I believe it can control the weather, but it does open the door to the idea that it might have been one of the things Saarinen was out to achieve.
While at the OSS, Saarinen designed buildings and weapon systems, many of which were never completed or built.
You wonder if you could steer a tornado. What would it take? Even a nuclear weapon might just nudge it, if even that.
One challenge with that is your shock wave is going to be hard to focus, perhaps, and it might cause the damage you were hoping to avoid with the tornado. I would be looking at how much can I control or change local pressures in the atmosphere near and around the tornado.
These are forces at work that could wipe out major cities. And we're finding out every day new things that we've never seen before. So maybe the lesson learned here is we shouldn't meddle with forces that we don't really understand, because we may not like the result.
Good afternoon to you. Earlier on today, apparently a woman rang the BBC and said she heard that there was a hurricane on the way. Well, if you're watching, don't worry, there isn't. But having said that, actually, the weather will become very windy, but most of the strong winds, incidentally, will be down over Spain and across into France as well. But there's a vicious-looking area of low pressure on our doorstep, nevertheless, around about the Brittany area, and that is going to head across the southeastern corner of the country, bringing, if nothing else, a lot of rain with it. On the satellite picture you can see that there's of course a lot of cloud as well as a lot of rain stretching right across Europe. Indeed, most areas there are just as unsettled as we are, having some outbreaks of rain. That's the way the rainfall pattern is looking at the moment. A lot of shading, a lot of rain across many parts of Europe. Let's zoom in a little bit closer and have a look at the British scene though. And as you can see, rain is now pushing up towards southern counties, and there's a fair bit of rain still further north left over from last night's weather system. Now, as I run the sequence, you can see just how quickly the rain comes up from France, affects many southern and eastern areas, and then eventually later on tonight clears on out of the way and leaves us tomorrow in a fairly stiff run of westerly winds, bringing along quite a few showers. Well, I had a peep at the radar just before I came down a short while ago. It looked as if rain wasn't very far away from the London area, but certainly some outbreaks of rain coming nicely now into many southern counties of England. The more midland areas and Wales are a little bit brighter and drier, just one or two showers around. Northern England, Northern Ireland and Scotland, though, a fair amount of cloud. And again, there are some outbreaks of rain, and some of the rain fairly heavy, although it's beginning to ease off and turn showery now over Northern Ireland. Now, as time goes on, the rain in the north will edge up into northern parts of Scotland, tending to brighten up a little bit and dry up in the more northern areas there of England. But the rain further south really setting in as time goes on for East Anglia, many southern parts of England, the afternoon ending up very wet and quite cool too, 12 or 13 Celsius, only the mid-50s Fahrenheit. Now, to begin with this evening, a lot of wet weather around in many eastern and southern parts of the country. Fairly heavy rain in that, still some quite heavy rain in that northern part of Scotland as well. But the rain in the north of Scotland will slowly clear away, and the rain in the south as well, except that is, I think, in those eastern counties where it will last into the morning. And as it clears away, the cloud should break, but it will leave behind just one or two showers. Becoming quite windy, you're going to notice it around these southern and southeastern parts as the evening and night goes on. A reasonably cool night as well. Now, there's the picture for tomorrow. Stiff westerly winds, and that means to say that once the rain clears from the east, it's a mixture of sunshine and showers for us all, and rather cool with it. Good afternoon to you. Earlier on today, apparently a woman rang the BBC and said she heard that there was a hurricane on the way. Well, if you're watching, don't worry, there isn't. Good afternoon to you. Earlier on today, apparently a woman rang the BBC and said she heard that there was a hurricane on the way. Well, if you're watching, don't worry, there isn't.
The Meteorological Office is holding a full investigation to find out why weathermen failed to predict the storms. They, like the rest of the country, were taken completely by surprise. What they did know was that a deep depression surrounded by spinning winds had formed in the Bay of Biscay. They said it wouldn't get past the channel, but the gales hit northwest Brittany around 11 o'clock last night and arrived at Dorset and Hampshire around midnight. By 3 in the morning, the storms were in London and the southeast. By 6, the gales were heading for the Midlands, and around 8 this morning, they'd left Humberside for the North Sea and Norway.
At one stage last night, Hampshire police said every major road in the county was closed. One man died when a tree hit his car. Others simply didn't see the obstacles in time. No one was hurt in this incident, one of dozens of minor crashes all over the south. But 2 firemen died and 4 were injured when a tree crashed onto their fire engine. They had been racing to one of thousands of emergency calls. At Barton-on-Sea in Dorset, a family narrowly escaped injury when the side of their flat collapsed. And in nearby Highcliffe, 90 pensioners had to be evacuated when their roof was ripped clean away. Inside, their rooms have been left wide open to the elements.
For 6 hours this morning, southern Britain was battered by the worst storms the nation has known for nearly 3 centuries. They came in from the ocean without any warning from the weathermen. The winds were those of a hurricane. They cut a swathe of destruction from Cornwall to Kent and northwards to London and beyond. The capital and the counties around it were without electric power for hours. Trains were stopped, roads blocked. The emergency services brought every available man and machine into operation. Tonight, the storms have gone, but they've left at least 13 people dead and damage which will cost millions to repair. This afternoon, ministers were called to a special meeting at the Cabinet Office in Whitehall. Afterwards, the Home Secretary, Douglas Hurd, said the southeast of England had experienced the worst night of disaster since the end of the war. The damage was worst along England's south coast. In Dorset, 2 died, firemen crushed by a falling tree. In Hampshire, 1 person died. In Sussex, 3 lost their lives, hit by falling masonry and flying debris. In Kent, 5 died, among them 2 seamen in a ship off Dover Harbour. And London and Berkshire, 1 dead in each. Many others have been injured, thousands have suffered serious damage to their homes. Later we'll be seeing how the emergency services coped with a night the like of which they said they'd never known before. We'll be asking why the men from the Met Office didn't know the storm was coming until it was too late, and how the insurance companies will cope with the claims. But first, our reporters tell the story of last night.
Southern England suffered the full fury of the freak hurricane-force winds. In their wake, a trail of devastation, the worst damage to property since the Second World War. Nowhere escaped unscathed. Roofs were completely ripped off blocks of flats and hundreds of homes along the whole of the south coast. Shops were reduced to rubble. At Folkestone, the Sea-Link ferry Hengist was blown into the sea wall and ran aground. The 20 crew are safe, but 2 men are still missing off Dover after their ship sank just outside the harbour. At Sheerness Docks, a crane completely toppled over in the high winds. This plane was flipped upside down like a plastic toy. Many people trapped in homes which threatened to collapse had to be rescued by the emergency services. The spirit of the Blitz was abroad, but for some of the elderly, the worst night in living memory was a terrifying experience.
It's been a bit of a shock, just like the Blitz. It's been a bit of a shock, just like the Blitz.
These Sussex policemen miraculously escaped unhurt when a tree collapsed on their patrol car. Brighton town centre was battered beyond recognition, littered with uprooted trees. Caravan sites and holiday homes were wrecked, smashed to tinder. Huge tracts of Sussex woodland flattened like matchwood. On the storm-lashed Isle of Wight, coastguards recorded wind speeds of 110 miles an hour, almost twice hurricane force. At one time, the wind speeds went off the scale, too strong to even measure. The famous Shanklin Pier, nearly a century old, was smashed to pieces and swept away overnight.
HAARP uses 1 billion watts beamed straight into the ionosphere for experiments. Picture these strings on the piano as layers of the earth. Each one has its own frequency. What we used to do is beam radio waves into the ground, and it would vibrate any strings that were present in the ground. We might get a sound back like, and we'd say, that's natural gas. We might get a sound back like, and we say that's crude oil. we were able to identify each frequency. We accomplished this with just 30 watts of radio power. If you do this with 1 billion watts, the vibrations are so violent that the entire piano would shake. In fact, the whole house would shake. In fact, the vibrations could be so severe underground that could even cause an earthquake.
In 1912, Nikola Tesla, a visionary genius, saw ways to tame the sky, to make the atmosphere glow. He developed alternating current, high-frequency radio technology, and free energy. He experimented with both high and low frequencies and electromagnetic waves. He envisioned altering the weather and creating shields around the Earth to protect us from missiles, and he claimed he knew how to split the Earth in two. In 1985, Bernard Eastlund applied for patents that could make some of these ideas real. Many claim that these patents have become the blueprint for HAARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program.
Applications discussed in the patents included destroying missiles. Communications control and disruption were included. There were some other ideas both to possibly modify weather and finally to lift a portion of the upper atmosphere further out into space where hopefully it would be able to deflect missile trajectories.
There can be little doubt that the Great Storm of the 15th and 16th of October 1987 remains one of the most talked about weather events for a generation. With wind gusts in excess of 100 miles an hour, the storm hit the south of England, causing widespread disruption. The Great Storm has gone down in history as the worst storm to hit England since 1703, causing £1 billion worth of damage. Over the last 25 years, the way weather forecasts are produced, how our forecasts are communicated, and how people act in response to our forecasts have all changed. But what are the facts behind the Great Storm? What actually happened in 1987? And why did it cause so much damage? And what has changed in the last 25 years?
What made it a very interesting storm wasn't just the fact it was a deep low, because you get deep lows at this time of year. It was the fact that pressure behind the depression rose significantly, about 20 millibars in 3 hours, which is a horrendous rise of pressure. And of course that squeezes the isobars, and then from the squeezed isobars you get this very, very strong wind. So we had what's called a sting jet as well. So it all came together to be a very, very dangerous depression indeed. It sometimes takes your darkest hour for any professional organisation to learn lessons, and we've learnt many lessons. And it's interesting, you have to go back 25 years to talk about when the Met Office last missed a big storm, because through the 90s, the Burnsday storm comes to mind, the snowstorms of recent times, the floods of 97 and the floods of this autumn. We've done remarkably well.
Back in 1987, we didn't really have a way of letting anybody know when there was severe weather on the way. Of course, there's no point in us having the knowledge that there is something on the way if we don't let anybody know about it. So really it was a wake-up call, and in the last 25 years we've developed the National Severe Weather Warning Service, and we've consistently been looking at that and changing it, and now it takes both the risk of something happening, so using all our different techniques for forecasting, so how likely something's going to happen, as well as the impact of that weather. In the last few years we've developed a network of Met Office advisors across the United Kingdom. Their job is to work very closely with the responder community to plan for the severe weather, to write severe weather plans that they can use when the severe weather does hit, but also to exercise those plans. So we pretend that there's severe weather coming so that they can work out what they will do in the real event. Then in the run-up to severe weather, we'll be working very closely with them so that they can work out where to put their resources, what they might need to do to prepare for that severe weather coming along, and then to get back to normal as quickly as possible once the severe weather has passed.
But how has our science and technology changed since 1987, and what improvements have we seen?
Well, we forecast the weather with very, very complicated computer models of the atmosphere, and there's been a mixture of improvements, some of it to the science of how we understand the atmosphere and how we represent that in our models, how we represent clouds or mountains. The other huge advance has been in the technology, the supercomputers we use to do the forecasts with. We have to split the globe into squares, the level of detail we try and forecast for, and back in 1987 those squares were 80 kilometres for the most detailed United Kingdom model. Nowadays we can run with squares which are only 1.5 kilometres across, and so you can imagine the extra detail you can get in terms of the effect of hills in the United Kingdom or individual storm systems or coastlines. As well as running these much more detailed models, another thing we do is run lots of different forecasts for the same event. Rather than just running it once, we'll run lots of just slightly different forecasts, and these will give us an idea of the risk of different events happening.
We can't say we won't see another storm like the one in 1987, but we are able to better forecast and warn of severe weather. We can help to minimise the impacts by working with our partners and emergency responders and the public.
I would be looking at how much can I control or change local pressures in the atmosphere near and around the tornado. I would be looking at how much can I control or change local pressures in the atmosphere near and around the tornado.
These are forces at work that could wipe out major cities. And we're finding out every day new things that we've never seen before.
What made it a very interesting storm wasn't just the fact it was a deep low, because you get deep lows at this time of year. It was the fact that pressure behind the depression rose significantly, about 20 millibars in 3 hours, which is a horrendous rise of pressure.
Earlier on today, apparently, a woman rang the BBC and said she heard that there was a hurricane on the way. Well, if you're watching, don't worry, there isn't.
In 1985, Bernard Eastland applied for patents that could make some of these ideas real. Many claim that these patents have become the blueprint for HAARP. In 1985, Bernard Eastland applied for patents that could make some of these ideas real. Many claim that these patents have become the blueprint for HAARP.
Nunca se ve bailando en la pista sola. Llega a montarla con sus amigas gastando el dólar.
Don't worry, there isn't.